Hey everyone, and welcome back. You guys sent in some really interesting stuff about bitter foods
Oh, yeah.
and their potential health benefits. So we're going to do a deep dive today into a BBC Learning English video called Bitter Food, Better Health.
Interesting.
And I think this will be a really fun one.
Yeah, I think so too.
The video starts out with this question, and it asks,
Okay.
how many basic tastes can humans actually detect?
Hmm.
So we'll get back to that.
All right.
But I think a really interesting point the video makes is this link between bitter foods and our gut microbiome.
Yeah, the microbiome is so fascinating.
So
Like this whole world.
Okay, so what is a microbiome for those of us who don't have a PhD in this stuff?
Yeah, so basically you can think of it as this like huge community of microorganisms
Oh, wow.
living in your digestive tract.
Okay.
It's like trillions of bacteria and fungi and viruses.
Trillions.
Yeah, all just hanging out and interacting with each other.
Oh, my God.
And they play a really important role in so many things.
Okay.
Like how we digest our food, how our immune system functions,
Wow.
all sorts of stuff.
So the video says that certain bitter compounds in foods can actually interact positively with this microbiome?
Exactly. And there's a lot of research going on about how these compounds
Okay.
help promote the growth of good bacteria in the gut.
And the video uses this phrase, suppress hunger feelings.
Right. So when you have a balanced and healthy microbiome,
Yeah.
it can actually help regulate your appetite
Mm-hmm.
and make you feel fuller for longer.
So is that because the good bacteria are thriving?
That's part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
These bacteria help break down the food we eat
Mm-hmm.
and produce certain compounds that can signal to our brain
Interesting.
that we're full.
Okay.
There's still a lot we're learning about the gut microbiome, but it's a really exciting area of research.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
The video then goes on to talk about the answer at the tip of our taste buds.
Right.
Which, of course, made me think, like, what are taste buds and how do they even work?
Okay, so taste buds are these tiny little sensory organs
Okay.
that live in those bumps on your tongue
Oh,
called papillae.
papillae.
Yeah. And each taste bud is made up of a bunch of different receptor cells.
Okay.
And each one of those is specialized to detect a specific taste,
Wow.
like sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and
And umami, the mysterious fifth taste.
exactly.
Mm.
We'll have to get into that later.
Yeah.
But for now, back to bitterness.
Okay.
So when you eat something bitter,
Mm-hmm.
these special molecules in the food bind to those bitter taste receptors.
Oh,
And that sends a signal to your brain.
I see.
And your brain interprets that signal as bitter.
So it's like a whole chain reaction happening just from
Yes.
one little bite.
It is really amazing.
So we're kind of hardwired to detect bitterness as like a survival mechanism to avoid like poisonous plants.
Yeah, that's what scientists think.
Oh.
It was a way for our ancestors to protect themselves.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But if we evolved to avoid bitterness, how come we enjoy things like coffee
That's a great question.
or dark chocolate?
Right. Because those are technically bitter,
Yeah,
but we love them.
it's true.
It all comes down to perception and how we experience bitterness.
Right.
And that's influenced by a bunch of factors,
Oh, yeah.
like our genetics, our culture, and even our personal experiences.
So the chef interviewed in the video.
Alexina Anatol,
Yeah.
she had some really interesting thoughts about that.
Alexina Atoll.
Yeah.
Yeah, she makes a really interesting point about how we actually consume more bitter foods than we realize.
Right. Think about it.
Yeah.
Coffee, tea,
Yeah.
dark chocolate, even beer and wine.
Oh, yeah.
They all have some degree of bitterness.
I guess you're right. I never really thought about it that way.
It's funny how we often don't even register those bitter notes.
Yeah.
Because they've become so normalized in our diets.
But we've kind of been trained to...
Yeah, Alexina talks about how this aversion to bitterness
Right.
is actually a learned behavior.
So like from childhood, we're given all these sweet and salty foods.
Exactly.
Okay.
And our taste buds kind of get used to those more immediately gratifying tastes.
So we develop this bias against bitterness.
Yeah, it's almost subconscious.
That's so interesting.
It is, and it can really limit our food choices.
Well, I'm already starting to see bitter foods in a whole new light.
Yeah. It's pretty cool when you start to think about it.
It really is like we've been missing out on all these
Right.
potential flavors and health benefits.
Exactly.
So how can we start to challenge that bias and maybe even...
Well, I think it's all about being more mindful about our food choices
Okay.
and trying to expand our palates.
That makes sense.
You know, maybe start by incorporating some slightly bitter foods
Okay.
into your diet and gradually increase the intensity.
Like what kinds of foods?
Well, things like Cruciferous vegetables are a great place to start,
Okay.
like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale.
Those are pretty bitter.
They can be, yeah,
Okay.
but they're also packed with nutrients and those bitter compounds we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And there are ways to cook them to make them more palatable.
Yeah.
Roasting them with some olive oil and spices can really bring out their sweetness
Oh,
and
yeah.
make them less intense.
Good tip.
Thanks.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to eat things we hate.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about exploring and finding those bitter flavors that we actually enjoy.
That sounds way more fun.
Yeah, it should be enjoyable.
Yeah.
Right.
This is all so fascinating and makes me realize how much I still have to learn about
Oh, me too.
taste and how it affects our health.
It's a lifelong journey.
It really is.
Right.
Before we go too far, I think we need to revisit that question from the beginning of the video.
Okay. The one about how many basic tastes humans can detect.
Yeah.
Right.
You ready to reveal the answer?
I am. So the answer is 5,
5.
not 4.
Wow. I honestly thought it was just the 4.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
So remind me what that 5th taste is.
Umami.
Umami.
It's often described as savory or meaty.
Oh, yeah.
It's that rich, satisfying taste you get from things like grilled meats or mushrooms or aged cheese.
Okay, yeah. So it's like a totally separate taste from the other 4.
Exactly. It's its own unique thing.
Wow.
And it plays a really important role in how we experience flavor.
This is amazing. I'm already starting to see the world of food in a whole new way.
I know. It's pretty cool, right?
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've learned a lot today about bitter foods
Yeah.
and the science behind taste.
We covered a lot of ground.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Definitely.
So stay tuned because in the next part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to delve even deeper into the world of umami
Sounds good.
and how it interacts with bitter flavors to create some
Ah.
truly delicious and healthy culinary experiences.
I'm excited to dive in.
Me too.
So before we got sidetracked with umami, we were talking about how to challenge that bias against bitter foods.
Yeah, like, are we supposed to force ourselves to eat kale and Brussels sprouts all the time?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
It's about finding a balance
Right.
and incorporating bitter flavors in a way that you enjoy.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, one way is to pair bitter foods with other flavors that can help balance them out.
Like what?
Well, we already talked about umami
Right.
and how it can add that savory depth.
Yeah.
But you can also use sweetness or saltiness.
Oh, okay.
For example, you could add a squeeze of lemon juice to a bitter green smoothie,
Okay.
or the drizzle of honey on grapefruit,
Oh, that sounds good.
or a pinch of salt in dark chocolate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do that sometimes.
Those little additions can really make a difference.
So it's like tricking our taste buds a little bit.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
But it's also about training them to appreciate those bitter notes.
That makes sense.
Another technique is to cook bitter vegetables in a way that mellows out their intensity.
Okay.
Roasting is a great option,
That you can bring out their natural sweetness.
like roasted Brussels sprouts.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are way better than raw Brussels sprouts.
Right.
So roasting is like the magic trick for bitter veggies.
It can definitely help.
Okay, and what about spices?
Spices are great too.
Yeah.
Adding warming spices like ginger or cinnamon can also help to balance bitterness.
Okay, so it's all about experimenting and finding what works for us.
Exactly.
Well, this whole conversation has been so eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about all the different ways I can add more bitter foods into my diet.
That's great.
Now I'm actually excited to try new things.
That's the spirit.
Okay, so let's recap what we've learned today.
Okay.
We started by talking about how our modern food environment has kind of conditioned us to avoid bitterness.
Right. We're surrounded by all these hyper-palatable foods
Yeah.
that are loaded with sugar, salt, and fat.
And those can kind of hijack our taste buds
Yeah.
and make us crave those flavors even more. And that can make it harder to appreciate those subtler, more complex flavors like bitterness.
Right. And we talked about how reintroducing bitter foods into our diets could help us reset our palates.
Yeah, and potentially improve our health.
And we discussed some specific techniques for incorporating bitter flavors into our meals.
Like balancing bitterness with other flavors.
Yeah.
And cooking bitter vegetables in a way that mellows out their intensity.
Right. And using spices to enhance the flavor.
Exactly.
This has been such a great deep dive.
It has been really interesting.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
And I'm definitely going to be more mindful about incorporating bitter foods into my diet from now on.
That's great to hear.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to embrace the bitter.
Yeah, don't be afraid to try new things.
And you never know, you might just discover your new favorite food.
Exactly.
And that's it for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time. So we've been talking about how our modern food environment kind of pushes us away from bitter flavors.
Yeah.
But what if we, like, flip the script?
What do you mean?
Like, what if we started incorporating more bitter foods back into our diets?
Well, there's actually some research that suggests that
Right.
doing that could actually increase our sensitivity to bitter flavors over time.
So it's like we could retrain our taste buds.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's like we're unlocking a hidden taste dimension.
Yeah, and besides just the taste aspect, are there any other benefits to...
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Like we mentioned earlier, some bitter compounds have anti-inflammatory properties.
Oh, right, and inflammation is linked to, like...
Yeah, a whole bunch of health problems.
Okay.
Heart disease, cancer.
So by eating bitter foods, we could be helping to reduce inflammation.
Potentially, yeah.
Wow. It's amazing how powerful these flavors can be.
It really is.
So it's not just about expanding our palates, it's about taking care of our health, too.
Exactly. It's all connected.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has been fun.
I feel like I've learned so much about bitter foods and how they can actually be good for us.
It's all about changing our perspective.
Yeah, and embracing the full spectrum of flavors.
Right.
So to all of our listeners out there, we can encourage you to try some new bitter foods.
Yeah, you might be surprised at what you discover.
And maybe you'll even find a new favorite.
You never know.
That's all for today's deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.